All right, you guys are on the record.
Oh, thank goodness. I was so worried that we'd never be on the record again.
Netflix's Carmen Sandiego reboot has a premiere date, but they didn't announce it till we were in the middle of our show.
Yeah, you know why? Because they're cowards. They're scared. They're scared of real reactions.
That always happens. Always, like, big stuff comes out on Tuesdays right after we do the show.
Yeah. I think they need to stop that.
Yeah.
Stop it.
I mean, you know. Yeah, why? What's up with this company that has 30 announcements per week and having at least one or two of them in the middle of our 4-hour recording block?
How rude!
It is. I mean, this Netflix is like is doing good on their promise to like have 50 plus new pieces of content this year.
Yeah, no, they ain't messing around, man. It's congratulations, our dream came true, and now it's a nightmare.
We have definitely gotten to the point where instead of we've gone from, hey, I'm going to report on our top story that Netflix has an original show, to, hey, in our what to watch section, we'll make note of all the new shows Netflix has come, to, hey, when the big shows come to Netflix, we'll make sure we note them, to, we'll note Netflix shows when we think they're interesting.
Yeah. Only like we are at the point of like having to make like a call on if something is big or not.
Hey, speaking of which, that opening segment, I feel like since you sent me a text ahead of time and you wrote it in there, I felt you were calling a shot for me to try to land on justifying it. Did I get anywhere close to what you were hoping for out of talking about the is it worth $100 million for Friends?
Oh yeah,
for a year?
You mean the How to Watch?
Yeah. No. I mean it was a Oh yeah. Sorry. Yeah. How to Watch.
No, it was definitely my thought when I read this was this is plays perfectly into a thing that happens naturally on Cord Killers, which is we have a story, and then Brian says, well, as a person who runs a video business, you have to remember that this and that, and here's some experience from things that I've read and things that I know, and that was exactly what I wanted you to do, which was to go like, all right, folks, here's why this is happening. It was great.
Dude, played right into his hand.
I'm glad to hear it. To be honest, I was surprised that Veronica's estimate was 15% of everybody would be working their way through high. Friends.
Though I also think it wouldn't take someone a year to go through the Friends batch. Like, I mean, we're talking about fake numbers anyway.
Right. But but let's say, I mean, it'll take some people 2 years to get around to going through the whole thing if they watch, if it's in their bin of like.
Okay.
Because it could be like the when I don't know what to watch, I keep going through this queue, right? Yeah. And then other people, like for example, the way it is with The Office with me and Penny, it's just it's Tuesday, we're driving to school.
Well, and on the flip side, I went through The Office in like 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like it's different for everybody, but I think the fact that this Friends thing is a news story is also just like affecting ancillary subscribers, right? I was like, oh, I like Friends. I might want to watch Friends sometime.
That's true. It's probably boosting viewership of Friends because people are like, oh, right, I hadn't thought about Friends.
That's interesting.
That's on Netflix?
So of that news headline making $100 million spent, how much of that is sort of a rebate in free advertising they got by virtue of spending $100 million?
I mean, it's not zero.
Yeah. That's a good point. Speaking of which, man, The Office, I'm sad that I fell off of it because it kind of like it's harder and harder to keep that show interesting the longer it goes, and yet it does and gets weirdly better and better.
How far in are you guys?
Season 5? Spoiler talk. I can only express it in spoiler talk. Holly has come back, and they're finally.
So pretty close to the end.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Oscar becomes like one of the most interesting, awesome characters near the later days. It's pretty great.
I didn't fall off until about 3 episodes into the last season, and that was because Michael Scott wasn't there. And I was like,
I haven't even gotten to that part.
It wasn't necessarily that they were bad. I was like, I fell into the trap of this isn't what I'm used to, and I'll watch it next week, and I never did.
I got to be honest. I kept expecting that to happen much earlier. I still haven't gotten there in the rewatch because I think
it's the end of the second to last season.
Okay, so I must be on the second to last season because the cover art, I don't even know if it shows Michael Scott anywhere on there. It shows...
No, yeah, they definitely don't. They use lots of different images on Netflix for stuff like that.
It has an algorithm that is weird.
Yeah.
Because for instance, Death in Paradise has had 3 detectives. One detective has only been on the most recent season, but the other 2 kind of equally split. They also have 2 assistant detectives, 2 major ones across the series. And even when I'm like watching late, like last season, they were showing me either the first season's detective or just the first assistant detective, neither one of which were in the show that I was watching anymore. I'm like, if the algorithm's really smart, shouldn't it note that I'm on the current season and show me an image from that season?
What's funny is if the algorithm is really smart, it will show you whatever image is most likely to get you to continue to watch the show, whether it's accurate or not.
And what happens is I decide to watch the show. I sit down. I take a big dump, and then I go and sit down, and then I watch the show. But I turn it on, and I'm like, where is it?
Oh, you can't find it.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm looking for the current detective, and it's showing me the first detective who I haven't seen in 5 seasons, and that's why I'm having a hard time finding it because I'm looking for the wrong guy.
That's interesting.
Yeah, there is. I feel like I read an article a few months back talking about that because those cover images change they change all the time for kind of no reason, and so you can see it a lot in like the Netflix original cover image, but like they have realized that having just a person's face on the title does a lot of work, but that also leads to some very weird things where like certain characters are not major characters in a show, but they are definitely the key image of this cover, and you get into weird like algorithmic demographic stuff.
I have a feeling it's not personalized is the thing, that they're like, oh, these images cause the most clicks, so we'll show him that image, but it's not tailored to a person who's already watched as much as I have.
Well, and maybe that is authentically indicative of somebody who's in it will go through the extra effort to scan and figure out where it is.
Right.
So
in other words, it doesn't matter. I'm going to watch it anyway. So even if they make me take a few more seconds to find it, that doesn't matter because the algorithm's like, did he click? Great. Yeah. That's all we care about.
Super weird.
Hey, so follow up on that sorry to bother you stuff.
Sure.
I'm going to try to talk around spoilers just in case, there's somebody out there who might watch it.
Tough one too.
But specifically, it was interesting because I just wanted to show Bonnie the beginning of Sorry to Bother You because I remember it being very charming and indie comedy looking. And we got to about the 40-minute mark, and I'm like, so anyway, so this stuff happens, and then scrubbing forward 35 minutes, and it's like, and then I just described to her what she was missing and spared her all the visuals, and then she was just like, and then we watched.
I mean, did she appreciate like? I understand. I equally don't want to speak for Bonnie in the same way. Don't want to stick up for someone who didn't like that.
Right.
Did she like that?
Well, the first 40 minutes, our relationship, quirky, independent comedy with social commentary and stuff. And all of that stuff works. You see him ascend through the ranks, and then, it starts to get, I'd say there's a good 30 minutes where things are just in general ugly. And Bonnie, she's like, look, man, between being a mom and being an artist, I only have so much mental real estate, and I don't want it filled with ugly shit that's going to lodge in there like a barb and get stuck in my brain. Mm-hmm. So, the ugly moments we skipped are, pretty much all the party. You just feel dark. And, again, when you're getting the whole story, that makes sense. Sure. We skipped all of the party.
We don't need to get into too many details.
Sure. But then, after the fact, you have his redemptive arc at the end, and she was on board for all of that and seemed to enjoy it.
Interesting.
I know I'm thinking 30 miles ahead of what the conversation is right now, but I think the world's going to be okay.
Whoa. What's up, Nostradamus?
I'll try to follow where my thought process went here.
Nostradamus!
Or Tom Stradamus. They all work.
No, Nostradamus is the best.
I was thinking about how Bryce was being very good at saying, well, I don't want to speak for someone else's taste, but I'm curious, and like asking the question in a way that in the past we might have been not so careful about. And I was thinking, well, part of the reasons that we're being so considerate these days is we're running into so many other people who are like, hey, that's not okay for you to say that around me, because there's so much more communication. And I started thinking about all these problems with Twitter and Facebook and everybody getting angry at each other all the time and the culture of outrage. And I'm like, what's happening is people are learning how to communicate. And yeah, not everybody is, and there's a bunch of bad actors out there too, but the majority of people are doing what Bryce is doing and saying like, well, you know what, because I've been exposed to all these different ways of viewing things, I'm actually going to keep in mind that there's another way that maybe I'm not considering here. And if the majority of us do that, we're going to be fine.
Yeah, I talked with Jason Murphy on a recorded thing that is not out and I'm not promoting yet, a little bit about that. And I think there is still like growing pains with online
it's growing
discussions
pains right now. Absolutely. It's horrible growing pains.
I think a lot of it is because the medium is still very dehumanizing in terms of like, you know, if you're posting a YouTube comment, you are writing in a text box. You are not talking to someone in front of you. You might not even be watching the video while you're typing it.
We haven't learned to deal with that.
You have no expectation of a response, and so you go in thinking, okay, well, no one's probably gonna even see this, so you kind of get to be complete id on it.
Right. You get to, for your own benefit, have the cathartic screaming into an empty room. Right. Only, of course, it's not an empty room.
It's just a room that knows better to engage with that stuff, and a lot of times knows not to engage with that stuff just for emotion. Well, I mean, people are getting, you know, what is it? You know, overworked on like constantly being online and like if you're a YouTuber and you're constantly working stuff out, you know, those people are burning out and
yeah,
I think
there's
that's part of it.
to be, you know, I'll throw this plug. I've mentioned the book, The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt and another guy, but if you're not going to read the book, at least listen to the interview with the other guy, whose name I don't remember, on Andrew Heaton's podcast, Something's Off with Andrew Heaton. He spends an hour and change talking with the guy, and there are some alarming statistics. Suicide among teenage girls is up 70%, and
suicide in general is up is up huge in the United States.
Correct.
Against the trend of the rest of the world.
Correct. And it is almost certainly being traced back to social anxiety because, you know, from a biological perspective, exile from any community, you know, from your theoretical tribe of 150 people, exile was a death sentence. So as a result, we have these biological
but I've also
impulses.
seen that suicide is up amongst older people because of the opioid crisis. So I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm saying there's probably multiple factors at play here.
Specifically among the iGen, like that demographic. So what we tend to overgeneralize as millennials is really broken into millennials and then iGen. iGen is the one that is growing up with social media and has these hyper social anxiety issues that unfortunately is causing people to kill themselves, which is bad. But in that regard, he you know, the thesis of the book, and you hear this, is the reminder that human beings are anti-fragile and that it's important, which is different from. You know, we think that the opposite of being fragile is being, you know, robust, but robust just means you could take a beating and you're largely unaffected. Anti-fragile means that the more of a beating you take, the better off you are. Your bones are anti-fragile. That's why they turn to jelly when you're in the space station. Your muscles are anti-fragile. That's why you go to the gym and tear them down so they build up stronger. The book it calls them the three great untruths, and I'll let you listen to the book or the interview. But I don't know. It's really interesting to see us have a big enough data set now to acknowledge that we have a problem, and it's related somehow to the new way that we're all communicating to each other through screens and the dehumanizing aspect of it that is allowing good people to cause bad actions. And in doing so, create, you know, a doubling of the suicide rate. It's a fascinating book.
I don't know if I'm buying that social media has much to do with the suicide rate. I'm looking over this Washington Post article from June 2018, and it's got well-cited journal articles and studies saying that it has a lot to do with the opioid crisis, a lot to do with untreated mental health problems, and a lot to do with the recession, but it's not listing anything related to social media. And it points out that suicide numbers in the United States have been high since 1999.
Yeah, but you're also looking at overall suicide numbers, not the suicide numbers among people of the age of iGen, I assume.
Well, but that's one of those factors that you have to, if you look at it narrowly enough, maybe you'll see a correlation there, certainly, because there's a rise in social media use, there's a rise in suicide. But when you back up, maybe it's just a general rise in suicide for all these other causes that happens to be going along with the social media. Maybe not, but it's one of those things where like, oh, sure, common sense says that all of this pressure on social media obviously causes this problem, where it may just be an exacerbating factor to other underlying causes.
As I understood it, and all these numbers will be wrong, but suicides from age 10 to age 20 for baby boomers, for Generation X, for millennials, for iGen. These are all same ages, same everythings. And then all of a sudden, but the iGen has a doubling on it. I don't, it's hard for me to swallow that they're all addicted to opioids.
To look at that same period when they were in that age group and say, do you also see spikes in suicide in the older age groups for that same, maybe it's the time period, not the people in the age group.
That would make sense actually, because if all groups were experiencing an increase in suicide, man. By the way, I'd prefer not to try to defend a book that I'm only half remembering.
I'm not trying to make you. I'm trying very hard not to come at you, but then state my questions, not even doubts, just questions that I would need to have answered to come.
Sure. Well, and of course, there's a spectrum. Suicide is, of course, the headline-getting aspect of the whole thing. But like mental health, reports of anxiety, blah 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 blah. Like when you look at it as a whole, this generation, despite being the safest generation in the history of mankind, certainly perceives themselves to be unsafe to a level that we've not seen.
Now there's something I would guess the data bears out, is that perceptions have changed quite a bit because perceptions of ourselves changed with radio and television, and how could they not change with the advent of social media?
So if you want to dabble in there, listen to the Andrew Heaton interview. I think it was last Friday, 3 days ago as we record this.
At risk of derailing or changing topics, did I talk about watching Downsizing?
No, I finished Sorry to Bother You, and it recommended Downsizing, and I almost hit, but it was late enough that I was like, I'll get around to it.
You can tell that they promote them kind of in the same space.
Yeah.
So here's the thing about Downsizing is I think the first 30 to 40 minutes of it are a really interesting like concept piece, right? Like the idea of like, well, if we shrunk humanity, we
literally had a smaller footprint on the environment.
And then what you bear it out, like what does that transition look like? What does society look like? How do people think about like the idea of like, hey, if you go through the process to become small, as I think how they talk about it, do you still get a vote? Do you still get a full human vote?
Oh, wild.
And like, you know, the cost of these things and I think all that stuff is pretty cool. And then there's a party scene in the middle of it where that movie goes completely off the rails and is just a total mess. Does it
just get like wacky or something? Or
no, it's very much like the what's the name for the trope? Like the white messiah sort of effect, right? Like he's a physical therapist, but he gives up his license, and so he's going into like the poor part of the shrunken community, small, and so he's helping out all the minorities who are sick and can't really afford medication, and he's literally trying to save the world. Like that's kind of his character theme is like, oh, I'm doing stuff to save the world. And then there's you can see it coming from a mile away, but there's just a bad, unnecessary romantic element between him and another person that doesn't really have any foundation and is just generally bad. So I would say watch the first 45 minutes of Downsizing.
Find some reason to get distracted.
Because also, by the way, that movie's really long. That movie's like 2 hours long.
Okay, all right.
I would say, well, I guess 2 hours is not
in my
really
mind,
long,
it looks
2 hours
like
is not, though.
It's longer than norm, for what that movie is. It's longer than
most movies are more than 2 hours these days.
Well, no. But for like to me, it looks like a multiplicity level movie where it's like it's the one idea, and then you don't want it to overstay its welcome, and wrap that on up at around 90 minutes. But if it's going over 2 hours,
yeah, it's about the kind of movie it is. I think more than the actual time, right?
I would just say like I think everybody. I think watching up to there's a party and a drug sequence that happens kind of smack dab in the middle.
Sounds like a 60-minute
where-
episode of something
Right.
that has been stretched over 2 hours.
Right. I mean, because that's a real, like, the idea on its face is really cool, right? Like, what if a married couple decide to become small, and then in the process, one of them does not do it, and then what if you get divorced, and what if suddenly the idea of like becoming fabulously wealthy in this small whatever community gets taken away from you? Like, what does that look like? It's that is all really cool. So and Kristen Wiig is in like the first part of that movie, and she's also really good. So
yeah.
Downsizing,
Man,
coming to you if you want it,
if you'd like it,
for
yeah.
the first 40 minutes.
Hey man, dude, love doing After Talk. Thank you to all the beautiful patrons
Yeah.
who are listening to us. You guys make magic happen. Appreciate
That's
it.
right.
You are the best.